to the Code in Action videos for this book. In this video, we are going to be taking a look at Chapter 2, more specifically the process of setting up your virtual hacking lab. Now, within Chapter 2, we've already discussed or gone through the process of designing our lab and how our lab is going to look once we're actually done. But we are going to be focusing on the main section that includes installing and getting your operating systems, your target virtual machines set up. Now, the first aspect that we actually covered within that was the process of using a hypervisor so that you can set up multiple virtual machines or multiple operating systems that you can use and test during the process or during the actual course of this particular book. Now, we settled upon the VirtualBox solution as our primary hypervisor for two main reasons. Number one, it's available on all operating systems and it is open source. And number two, it's absolutely free to use and doesn't require any subscription. So that means you do not need to, have any license, or you do need to purchase any license to use it. So if this is your first time using a hypervisor, this video is going to help you through that process. Now, I also mentioned in the chapter that you can actually use any other hypervisor that you want. So a few examples of this are going to be solutions like VMware. So if you do have a license or you do opt on using VMware, for the actual virtual machines that we'll be using in this book, then you can go ahead and do that. However, we are going to be dealing with VirtualBox, so most of the support will be for VirtualBox, and most of the examples and virtual machines that we are going to be using in this book will be hosted on VirtualBox. All right, that being said, another important note that you need to take into consideration is whether or not your processor supports virtualization. Now, you're going to be either using an Intel processor or an AMD processor, and you can find out whether your processor supports virtualization by just performing a quick Google search here. So, for example, I can type in a simple example of a processor. So I can say i3-6100, and I can then click on the Intel link here. That's going to be the first link. As you can see, this processor supports virtualization technology. So the virtualization support for Intel is VTX. Once you know that virtualization is supported, you can then go ahead and start installing VirtualBox. So VirtualBox has various packages for each operating system. So you have Windows, the Windows packages, Mac OS X packages, Linux packages, Solaris, etc. So it works on all operating systems. So in this book, we're going to assume that your host operating system is going to be Windows. If you are using Linux or OS X, the process will not change. Just the installation of your hypervisor will change. So, you won't just want to click on your appropriate package here. In my case, it's Windows, so it's going to be an exe installer file, and you want to save that. Once that is saved, you just want to double click on the setup, and that'll begin the installation process. So it's going to be a simple installation wizard that you just need to click. You just need to, go through and specify where you want your VirtualBox to be installed. On Windows, I recommend leaving the installation instructions to the default. All right, so once you have VirtualBox installed, you can search for it on Windows or on Mac, or as well as Linux. In my case, I already have the actual application launcher as a shortcut or on my actual taskbar here. So if I click on VirtualBox, you should have a screen similar to mine, with the exception of the virtual machines on the left. So in my case, I've been using a VirtualBox already, so I already have virtual machines set up. In your case, you should not have any virtual machines set up on the left if this is your first time installing VirtualBox. On the right, you should have a similar screen which says "Welcome to VirtualBox." So now that we have VirtualBox installed, the next step is to set up our virtual hacking lab network, which is going to be a NAT network. So let's take a look at how to do that. All right, so to configure your NAT network, what you need to do is go into File, and you then want to click on Preferences, and you then want to head over to the Network tab, or the Network option within this menu. And you can see I already have the virtual hacking lab set up, and we can actually view the options here. So you can see the network is enabled. The network is called Virtual Hacking Lab. And the network CIDR is 10.10.10.0.24. So that is the network subnet that we've provided. Now you can change it to whatever you want. In our case, we're going to be using this particular subnet or CIDR throughout the entire, the entire course of this book. So again, to create one, all you need to do is click on this green icon here with the plus sign, and that's going to create a new one for you. And again, you can just customize it as we did and just replace it with the options that I had over there. Now, I already have done that, so I don't need to do that. So I'm just going to remove the new one. And again, the options are fairly simple. You want to name it something that you can recognize easily or differentiate other networks from. In our case, we'll just call it Virtual Hacking Lab. And then you want to provide the network CIDR, which we've done over here. And of course, the 24 represents the range. In our case, this is a perfect network range that'll again allow us to add as many network devices or virtual machines to the network as possible. All right. And once that is done, you just want to hit on OK, and you should have your NAT network configured. All right, for our virtual machines, as mentioned within the actual designing the lab section, we are going to be having Kali Linux as our attacker operating system or as our offensive operating system. We're then going to set up a plethora of Windows and Linux virtual machines. All right, so for our Windows virtual machines, you can download them from the following link that's also added to the book. So this is under developer.microsoft.com, and you're essentially looking for Microsoft Edge Tools VMs, right? So under this particular page, you can download virtual machines from Microsoft for free. And again, these are used by Microsoft Edge developers so that they can test the installations, but in our case, it'll work just as well. All right, so these virtual machines are limited or have a license for 90 days, after which the license will expire. And again, it tells you how to set up snapshots for your virtual machine so that you can roll back in the event you make a mistake or in the event your license expires. So for example, if I want a Windows 7 virtual machine, I can click on IE9 on Windows 7, and this is a 32-bit virtual machine. And then you can specify your hypervisor of choice. In our case, it's going to be VirtualBox, and you then want to click on download zip. All right, so I already have that downloaded. Once that is downloaded, we can move on to the next step, but let's take a look at Windows 10. Now, Windows 10, there are actually two ways you can go about doing this. One of them is again through the internet, the Microsoft Edge page right over here, or the VMs, and you can click on Microsoft Edge on Windows 10 x64 build 1809 stable, and you can also download that for VirtualBox. And again, the license lasts for 90 days, and you can use the snapshot feature so that you can roll back whenever your license has expired. However, you can also get a Windows 10 development environment, and again, this is Windows 10 Enterprise, and you can download it for VMware, Hyper-V, VirtualBox, etc. This is going to be slightly larger than your internet, your Microsoft Edge, virtual machines. And of course, you can again choose between which one works for you. You can also download the ISO if you want to install it as well. So you can download the ISO right over here. And again, this link will be added in the book so that you can actually, follow along if this is the route that you want to go. You can then download it for Enterprise or LTSC. In our case, we can click on Enterprise, and that'll download the ISO for you. And you can go through the process of installing Windows manually. However, if you want a pre-built Windows environment that's already installed, you can then use the virtual machine files right over here. All right, so once you have your Windows virtual machines downloaded, we can move on to the Linux virtual machines, which is going to be Metasploitable 2. And we're then going to download Metasploitable 3. So Metasploitable 3 can be Metasploitable 2 can be downloaded from the SourceForge link posted within the actual chapter, and you can just download it. It's a zip file. Just click on zip here, and it'll then start the download for me. In my case, I don't want to download that right now because I already have it. And the same goes for the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine. Which again is hosted on the Vagrant Up site, which again hosts the daily builds or the weekly builds for the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine, and you can download it for the hypervisor that you're using. In our case, it's VirtualBox, and it's about 6.48 gigabytes. Now, the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine is again based on Windows Server 2008, and in addition to that, we have the Windows 7 and Windows 10 virtual machines. All right, so once you have all your virtual machine files downloaded, we can take a look at how to set them up into VirtualBox. Alright, so I have downloaded my VM files here, and of course I'm just going to show you a few examples here. So for example, if you downloaded the Windows 7 virtual machine, it's going to be in a zip file. So it's as you can see, IE10 Windows 7 VirtualBox. I can then extract it. So you can use WinRAR or 7-zip to extract the actual zip archive, and that's going to take a few seconds here. So I'm just going to let that complete. Alright, so the zip archive is just completed extracting, and you can see the folder here. Now within the folder of any virtual machine file, you will be greeted by an OVF file or an OVA file. Alright, now an OVF file is essentially a package that can easily be imported into your hypervisor, in our case VirtualBox, and all you need to do is just double click on it and it'll bring up VirtualBox, the VirtualBox import virtual appliance wizard. Now within this, the only option that you need to configure is the machine base folder. So this is where the virtual machine is going to be stored. Now you need to be cognizant of the fact that this operating system will require, quite a bit of disk space. So, maybe 20 to 30 gigabytes per virtual machine. And that doesn't mean that it's going to use the entire space. But again, you need to have that sort of a range, set out for your virtual machines. So you can then specify the actual base folder where it's going to be stored and then just click on import. Now in my case, I already have the virtual machine imported, so I'm just going to hit cancel, and we can then click on our Windows 7 VM, which I just of course imported. Alright, so once you've imported your virtual machine, the next step is to actually click on it. So once you click on it, it's going to bring up a list of snapshots, but in your case, it'll probably take you to the details page. So right over here, when you click on a virtual machine, you will be able to see a little menu icon. And if you click on that, it'll tell you that you have three aspects of the virtual machine, or three pieces of information. So details, snapshots, logs. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take a snapshot of your virtual machine. Now a snapshot essentially is essentially a backup of a virtual machine. And what this means is it'll actually create a restore point so that in the event you make a mistake or damage the operating system, you can always roll back. Now, of course, the additional purpose of this feature is again for your licenses, because the Windows 7 virtual machine licenses only last 90 days. So once your license expires, you can also roll back and get a fresh Windows 7 VM again. So once you've taken your snapshot, you should be able to move on to the next step, which if we click on details, we can then click on settings, and within the virtual machine settings here, you can change the name. You can also change your hardware resource allocation here. So for example, I can customize how much RAM I want to give to my virtual machine. I can also specify the amount of processing cores I can provide to the virtual machine, and most importantly is going to be your network configuration. All right, so you want to make sure that you enable network adapter. You click on the NAT network option within the drop-down and make sure that the NAT network that you actually use here is the one that we created, called Virtual Hacking Lab. And once that is done, we can just hit OK, and you should be good to go. All you need to do now is just click on Start, and you should be able to have your virtual machine started. Now we'll confirm that the networking is actually working once we've set up all our virtual machines. And in your case, you simply need to replicate what we've done for all the other virtual machine files. If you do intend on installing your virtual machines manually through a ISO file, then once that is done, again, all you need to do is just go through these steps that I've just mentioned. Make sure that you add or configure the network correctly, so that all the virtual machines are on the same network and can communicate with each other. All right, so let's take a look at an interesting virtual machine file, and that of course is going to be Metasploitable 2. So Metasploitable 2 doesn't come in the format of an OVF file. Instead, it actually provides you with a VMDK file, which is a virtual machine hard drive or hard disk file. So again, once you've downloaded the Metasploitable 2 archive here, all you need to do is just extract it, which I'm going to do here. So we're just going to let that extract. Again, give it a few seconds. It shouldn't take that much time at all. And I'm just going to show you how to set up virtual machine files that do come in the form of a VMDK file. All right, so we'll let that complete extracting. All right, once that is extracted, you want to open up the folder, and you can see it's Metasploitable to Linux, and now you're going to have a VMDK file. All right, so again, as I said, a VMDK file is essentially a virtual machine hard disk file. What that means is we cannot directly import it into VirtualBox. Instead, we need to head over to VirtualBox, and we need to create a new virtual machine, and we can then provide it with a name here. So I'm just going to call it MS2. And I can then provide a folder where I actually want to save the virtual machine. Once you've selected the actual location as to where you want to save the virtual machine, you can then just hit select folder, and you then want to provide the operating system information. In our case, we know that Metasploitable 2 is a Linux operating system, and then we just want to say this is going to be other Linux, or you can simply say, we can just use Linux 2.63 3 in version 4, 32-bit, and we can just hit next. You can then provide it with RAM. In my case, I'll leave it at the default, which is 512 megabytes. Now for the hard disk, because we already have the VMDK file, we don't need to create a new one. We're going to click on use an existing virtual hard disk file. So you want to click on the browse option here, and we're going to add it. And we want to search for the Metasploitable 2 VMDK file, which is right over here. And then click open and then hit choose, and it's going to specify that VMDK file, and then hit create. All right, so you can see MS2 has been created. We now need to go into settings to change a few system settings here. We can leave the system, the hardware resource allocation as is. However, for the network, we want to make sure that it's set to NAT network and it's added to the virtual hacking lab. In my case, I already have Metasploitable 2 added, so I can just hit on remove and delete all files, and that's going to remove that virtual machine for me. Alright, so the next step is setting up our penetration testing distribution, or our attacker virtual machine. Now, our penetration testing distribution of choice is going to be Kali Linux, and for a few reasons. Kali Linux is the most well-known penetration testing distribution. It's actually well supported and is the industry standard for anyone who is interested in penetration testing, and of course for professionals as well. So you just want to perform a quick Google search for Kali Linux, and you want to click on the first link here. And Kali Linux again can be downloaded really easily. You want to click on the download link right over here. And again, it'll give you a very good listing of all the available installation mediums that you can actually, or all the various architectures and platforms that you can install it on. So for example, in our case, we want virtual machines, so we can click on virtual machines here, and it's going to sort it into two. You have your you have your VMware and VirtualBox virtual machines. So you can specify your architecture as well, 64-bit or 32-bit, and you can then download the VirtualBox virtual machine file for Kali. And again, that'll take a few minutes to an hour based on your internet connection. And the important thing to note here is that these virtual machines have the default credentials of Kali and Kali. So once you boot them up for the first time, they're going to have those credentials. Now, in my case, I already have the virtual machine file downloaded and set up. So again, it's going to give you an OVF file, which you can see right over here, Open Virtualization Format. And all you need to do, as I mentioned previously, to import an OVF file is just double click on it, and it's going to bring up the VirtualBox import wizard. And you can then specify the machine base folder and then click on import there. In my case, I already have my Kali Linux virtual machine right over here. So the only thing you want to do after it's imported is click on settings, and you then want to provide the network options here. So again, make sure it's the network adapter is connected to the NAT network, and the actual network is the virtual hacking lab that we've created. Once you've done that, you can also take a snapshot of it, because again, you always want a restore point, or a snapshot that you can actually restore, or you can actually roll back to in the event you make any mistakes. All right, so again, you just want to rinse and repeat that for all the operating systems that again were listed during the first two sections of this chapter that covered the actual design and build process. So we're going to have Windows 7, Windows 10, Metasploitable 2, Metasploitable 3, and the Kali Linux VM, which I've all imported. And of course, I have another virtual machine here, which is not related to the content in this book. All right, so once that is done, you want to power on your virtual machines, preferably all of them. But if you don't have the required system resources to do that, you can just boot one of them up at a time, and you can then, you know, try and test and see whether they're actually working and whether you can interact with them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start up the Kali Linux virtual machine here. So I'm going to hit start, and we're going to give that a few seconds to boot up. Alright, so once Kali is booted up, again, you want to use your default credentials. So, you know, you can type in Kali and then the password as Kali. In my case, I've already changed my password, but for you, the default credentials are going to be Kali and Kali. Alright, so I'm going to log in. Once it's logged in, the next step, of course, is to actually change the default credentials, because it's not recommended to use default credentials. And of course, you'll have a much different screen than the one I have right over here, because, you know, I've used and customized my installation of Kali. So I'm just going to open up a terminal session here by right clicking, and I can open up a terminal. There we go. So give that a few seconds, and there we are. We have a terminal session there, and I'll just zoom in. So the first thing you want to do is you want to change the password. So to change the password, all you need to do is type in the password command. And I'll type in my current password. In your case, that's going to be Kali, and then type in my new password. And I'll just type it in again. And in my case, you can see it tells me my password has not been changed, but in your case, it's going to tell you that, you know, the change has been successful. All right. Once you've changed your password, I'm just going to terminate that, or I can actually just close up my terminal. Once you've changed your password, we can move on to the next step. So you want to power on all your virtual machines, or again, preferably one at a time. And in my case, I'm going to power on the Windows 7 virtual machine here. And or I can actually just power on the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine. And again, make sure that it's added to the NAT network that we actually created. So again, that's going to take a few seconds. And the default credentials for the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine are Vagrant and Vagrant for both the username and the password. But in our case, we don't actually need to log in. All we are trying to do is actually test and see whether we can communicate with our virtual machines, right? So once that is booted up, there we are. So it's going to tell us we can then. It's telling us press Control Alt and Delete to log on. We have a shortcut for that with VirtualBox, and we can then click on Input, Keyboard, and insert Control Alt and Delete, and that's going to do it for us. And you can then log into the Vagrant account, which is a non-privileged user, with the credentials that I just told you. So it's, you know, Vagrant for the user and Vagrant for the password. But again, you don't need to log in for this particular step. In our case, we're just going to go back to Kali, and we're going to perform a quick discovery scan with NetDiscover, just to make sure that we can actually identify the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine. All right, so to perform your network discovery, the first thing you want to do again is just open up a new terminal. And again, I'll just zoom in so you can see what's going on. Now, if you want to find out the IP address of your Kali virtual machine, which is going to be important during this book, you want to type in ifconfig, right? And again, you want to click, you want to make sure you actually identify your actual virtual adapter. And in most cases, in the cases of virtual machines, because you're connected via Ethernet, it's going to be, the interface name is going to be Ethernet 0. What you're looking for is your iNet address here. In my case, and as in the case with the book, it's going to be 10.10.10.5. In your case, it's going to be slightly different. And of course, you might experience a few changes here and there because of DHCP. But again, this is a quick way of identifying that. However, given the fact that we want to now, of course, identify the other virtual machines' IP addresses, we need to perform a scan with NetDiscover. Now, to do that, we simply need to type in NetDiscover, and you can then hit enter, and it's going to tell you need to be root to run this. So again, we're just going to prefix this with sudo. We then need to provide our interface name, which is going to be Ethernet 0, and the network range. In our case, we know that the network range is 10.10.10.0 or 0.1, but we can use 1 and 24. That's the entire network range. And then we can hit enter. It's going to ask for your password, and it's then going to begin the scan here. So again, you can see it's already discovered the various IPs on the system, or rather that it was able to discover. So again, you can see that it's going to scan and it's going to provide you with all the IPs that it's been able to discover on our virtual hacking lab network. And in our case, we can see you want to ignore the first two IP addresses here, and of course the one that we've been able to identify clearly, which looks to be the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine IP, is right over here. So again, we can actually confirm that by going into the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine, and we can then provide just try and log in to the Vagrant user, which we're going to do right now. And again, give that a few seconds. We then want to click on the start menu and on your command prompt, and then you want to type in ipconfig, and it's going to tell us again, it confirms it right over here that the IP is indeed 10.10.10.11. So again, you can make sure or confirm that these two systems can communicate with each other by using the ping command. So we can say 10.10.10.11. We hit enter, and you can see we get a response from the target. So we do know that they can communicate with each other. And again, you should do the same process for all virtual machines. As I said, I would recommend that you actually start them all up at the same time if you do have the system resources to do so, and just confirm that they have valid IP addresses that are part of the CIDR that we specified, and that they can communicate with each other. That being said, that should wrap up the practical aspect of setting up your virtual hacking lab. And if you have any issues, feel free to actually comment on this particular video or to raise a query, and we will get back to you on that.